a phrase initially coined by economists in the Venezuelan Hugo Chavez regime was that, quote-unquote, things are never so bad that they can't get worse. And this phrase actually perfectly encapsulates the current situation at the Department of Homeland Security. On March 6th of this year, CNN reports that Kristi Noem was dismissed from her stay as the head of the Department of Homeland Security. And although puppies around the world rejoice, things seemingly got worse. Enter stage left Markwayne Mullin, Oklahoma senator, former talk show host, and former MMA fighter, most famous for threatening a fistfight against the Teamsters union leader in a congressional hearing in late 2023. Despite his rocky start to his congressional career, no pun intended, Markwayne Mullin has been thrust into the national spotlight, and also the most precarious time in DHS's 24-year history. And in this history, so considering the fact that DHS is currently in day 34 of a complete and total government shutdown, leadership is vital to not only first responders, but also the DHS as a whole. Considering the fact that Politico just 2 days ago reports that lines are already out the door and around the corner in airports in Houston and Memphis because TSA workers are now leaving for not being able to work with any pay, we begin to ask today's question. Should first responders be worried about Markwayne Mullin's appointment as secretary of the DHS? The answer here is yes, because Mullin falls victim to the same issues that plagued Kristi Noem's career. We can see this in three main ways. First of all, it's in his unwavering commitment to President Donald Trump. Second of all, it's within his policy of cuts to FEMA and vital resources. And finally, it's because of his hyper-politicization, cutting in the way of compromise for vital time. Now, to begin, let's introduce Markwayne Mullin as was introduced by President Donald Trump, not as senator or former MMA fighter, but rather, quote-unquote, MAGA warrior. Markwayne Mullin is a fervent supporter of Donald Trump, but it's the support, and our first main reason, will likely plague him the same way that it did Kristi Noem. Now, first of all, let's establish how this support for Donald Trump actually spelled doom for Kristi Noem's career as head of the DHS. A Washington Post article published just today notes that Kristi Noem's DHS career was seemingly ended because of her inability to stand independent from Donald Trump. Being the head of the DHS, you end up doing a lot of the dirty work of Donald Trump's immigration reform, enacting some of his most fringe and politically unpopular policies. Although Donald Trump might be able to get away with this, as head of the DHS, you seemingly can't. And so her inability to stand away from Donald Trump and stand up to his most politically unsavvy policies ultimately doomed her in public opinion and, finally, within the cabinet. But Markwayne Mullin seemingly isn't the man to stand up to Donald Trump. We can see that because of his history, as an NPR News article reports just 2 days ago, support for Donald Trump. First of all, it was within his fervent support in attempting to overturn the 2020 election. And later, it was seen in an embarrassing moment in Congress on July 22nd of last year, in which he blocked the Epstein Files resolution because, quote-unquote, we're just trying to give President Trump a little bit more cover. Fortunately for Mullin, saying the quiet part out loud didn't help him in Congress, and it likely won't help him in his role as head of the DHS, leading him to be plagued by the same issues that hurt Kristi Noem, and ultimately spelling doom for first responders nationwide. Now, our second main reason as to why Markwayne Mullin falls victim to the same issues as did Kristi Noem stands within his policy positions regarding cuts to FEMA and vital organizations within the DHS. Now, first, let's outline what exactly we saw in these cuts to FEMA. As CNN reports on July 21st of this year, FEMA undersaw $1 billion in grant money cut away by the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, and furthermore, 40% of their staffing cut because of the actions of Kristi Noem and Republican senators. One of those Republican senators also just so happened to be Markwayne Mullin. As is continued in an article from MS Now published just 2 days ago, Markwayne Mullin was a fervent supporter of cutting much of the funding that FEMA currently receives. Additionally, he mediated various meetings between Republican senators working to get the bill passed, and furthermore adding more resolutions cutting more and more funds from the Department of Homeland Security. It's this cutting of funds that makes the situation even more precarious for many of America's first responders. as the organization as a whole is less able to accurately and effectively respond to the national disasters threatening America today, and that's a direct result because of Markwayne Mullin's support in such policies. And so it's these policies that doomed Kristi Noem, and likely will do the same for Senator Markwayne Mullin. Now, as we close, our final main reason as to why Markwayne Mullin falls victim to the same issues as did Kristi Noem stands within his hyper-politicization, and how that cuts against the compromise necessary to lead DHS today. Now, first, let's establish the necessity for compromise in the current status of the DHS. As The Hill reports 3 days ago, the aforementioned government shutdown necessitates a level of compromise amongst Republicans and Democrats. In order for DHS to step out of its government shutdown, something that seemingly everyone supports, and for Markwayne Mullin to actually do his job, some level of compromise is needed. That means he's going to have to cross the aisle just a little bit in order to keep his agency afloat. But if anyone's going to work on compromise, Markwayne Mullin seemingly isn't the guy to do so. As is continued in an article published by CNN, published just 2 days ago, they continue that Markwayne Mullin argued for the complete and total dismissal of any airports located in quote-unquote sanctuary cities. He noted that all TSA officers should be removed from their posts in these cities, and that the airports should be shut down. It was this policy position of Markwayne Mullin that perfectly exemplifies the politicization that he leads with today. And it's this level of politicization that renders him unable to actually act towards compromise. Much like it was the inability to compromise for Kristi Noem that kicked her out of DHS after 30 days of government shutdown, will likely spell doom for Markwayne Mullin's career as DHS secretary, as he himself also seems unable to compromise. So as we close, it seems as though Markwayne Mullin's time as DHS secretary will be relatively familiar, as it looks a lot like the issues that plagued Kristi Noem's career as DHS secretary. We can see this in 3 main ways. First of all, it's within his fervent commitment to President Donald Trump. Second of all, it's within his policy regarding cuts to vital services. And finally, his hyper-politicization getting in the way of compromise. And so, although things seemingly cannot get worse, Markwayne Mullin shows that they can.